Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second installment of the Leadership Series, Leading from the Front. Today, we have a very esteemed guest, Mr. Sandile Zungu, who we are very privileged to host tonight. But before we start and we start firing away at Mr. Zungu, I'm going to hand over to Mpho Moseki, our Gauteng chairperson, to do tonight's intro.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to add my welcome to Mandisa's welcome. We really do have an esteemed guest today. Some of you would know Mr. Zungu as a businessman, as the head at the BBC, and we're really privileged. And I think tonight there's going to be revelations around what else is he doing in South Africa. So today we're really privileged to have him on board. I think for me, just a few words around just the series itself. You know that as BMF, we really drive managerial leadership and socioeconomic transformation. And this series really leading from the front encompasses all that. We using this as a platform to invite leaders to come and share their knowledge, their experience with our members, which really then pushes, drives managerial leadership. We hope that you take away the learnings and you go and implement in your spaces. I think when you look at leadership thesis or readings, there's different schools of thought around whether one should lead from the front or from the back. I mean, Mandela is well known to say you must lead from the back, but when there's danger, you must then lead from the front. And I think for us, leading from the front in these times of COVID is really was really important that we bring that to the fore, because if you think about the crisis that we have, that COVID has brought in, and you think about the inequalities that it has exposed, it's really, we need leaders who are going to lead from the front, who understand that when times are good, you lead from the back, but now is the time to lead from the front. Picked up something that's really interesting that I thought was really apt also in terms of just the caliber of people and the type of leader that we want to bring to this platform. Really, it's a Theodore Roosevelt as piece around the man in the arena. We really want, we're looking for people who are in the arena, who know the what it's worth to, the triumph of high achievement, but who knows what it feels like also to fail. And so are in the, fighting. And so we welcome you, Mr. Zungu, and we are really looking forward to learning and hearing about your experiences in the arena. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mpho. Without keeping everyone else, from hearing from our guest speaker, Mr. Zungu, welcome once again. I just wanted, I don't know if you want to say a couple of words of introduction, but from my end, when we spoke yesterday, I did some further digging into your background and the work that you've done. Obviously, we're all quite, in awe of your successes. And I know that you get asked this question a lot, and I would hope that everyone who's joined us tonight has done some digging of their own to kind of find out the man behind the name Sandile Zungu. So with that, I'd just like you to please, without rehashing the full history, to maybe start us on your background, particularly when you moved from what you've called your modest township upbringing, going to Hilton College and then to UCT. What were some of the, how did those experiences shape the kind of business person that you that you've become, and what were some of the key learnings that you got from that period in your life?
Well, thank you very much, Mandisa. And thank you, Mpho, for that welcome to this session. And thank you to the entire BMF family for seeing it fit that I participate in this platform. It means a lot to me as a person, but it also means a lot to the organization that I represent, the Black Business Council, of which BMF is part of the family. I come from a township called Umlazi. When you hear that we are products of a village, it takes a village to raise a child. It becomes a cliche, devoid of personalization until you reflect on your own journey and you truly appreciate how a humble society, which was working class, connived, conspired to clear the path. And despite all the social ills that one will have been exposed to, one ends up having nothing but praise for the township that raised him. That's my experience with Umlazi. The people of Umlazi would have conspired with all other worldly and heavenly forces to clear the path and to clear the log jams and remove the hurdles for me to ascend to the platforms that I now found myself in. Umlazi was, as it continues today, was a bedrock of everything South African, everything socially positive and everything socially negative. A working class township made up of civil servants, professionals like lawyers and doctors, few even at the time, and a few people who worked for corporates, multinationals in particular, who were beginning to ascend, climb up the ladder because there was something called the Sullivan Code, which was creating a space for especially America domiciled companies to recognize Black talent and to encourage it to ascend, to go climb up the ladder. Notwithstanding, it remained a working class environment. I come from an environment where my family valued prayer. We prayed together. My mother shepherded us to church every Sunday, even if my father couldn't go with us, but they had their own morning session. So we learned from them that God has to be placed at the center of everything that we did. That faith was very important. So when I completed my high school at Vukuzakhe High School at Umlazi, I had been offered a scholarship to do engineering at UCT. But first, I had to go to Hilton College to do a post-matric. It was Shell's belief that we came from such a disadvantaged background that we needed to do a bridging year, at very least, which will bridge academic inequalities, at best, which would help to assimilate us into more world-class environment in terms of the standard of living. I think both tricks worked. When I got to Hilton College, I immersed myself in academia, to the point that I registered for both the Maths Olympiad and the Science Olympiad. In the Science Olympiad, I did much better. I was in the top 100 nationally. The previous year, I had been in the top 10 in KwaZulu-Natal in the African category, as it were, or Black category. One thing that my Hilton experience, exposed to me was just the sheer inequality, which is in part is the subject of today's discussion. The sheer inequality between the world I came from, the world that I knew, which was epitomized by the living conditions of people of Mlazi, and the world that I was now being exposed to. The abundance at Hilton College compared to the wants and scarcity in my township. Exposure to such contradictions of a conscientious mind like I had already deepened my resolve that for so long as I had capacity, I have to be concerned about inequality. That's one of the learnings. One of the other learnings was just how shallow apartheid was, how artificial apartheid was, because there I was coming from a Black township, and I became the top science student in post-matric. I was a top mathematics student in post-matric. And my teacher at the time said, how does this happen? Here is a boy who probably in his entire basic education experience, he had not conducted more than 5 experiments, whether it was chemistry or physics. And he was beating the guys who were used to spending hours in the laboratory, beating them hands down. And I said, I'm Black. Apartheid means to deprive me of these opportunities. Apartheid means to define me as inferior. I just had to work harder to prove that not only was I not inferior, but how shallow the system was. And that learning continues today to define how I approach challenges. That I don't approach them from a position of disadvantage. I never allow myself to be defined by adversity. I define how I want to be defined. Whatever the challenges they may be, I want to excel in tackling those challenges, whether they be in business or in social life or elsewhere. So from Hilton College, I then went to UCT to do engineering, which was a 4-year degree. I was very clear what I was going to UCT for. And I'd made a commitment to my own parents that I had to go and work to help them to improve their lot. I had no obligation. They never said, my boy, go and work, buy me a car, buy me a house. No, not once did my parents ever put me under that kind of pressure, whether with seriousness or with tongue in cheek. Said, go out there and enjoy yourself, acquire the education you want, and be the better person than us, and everything else will resolve itself. But I put myself under tremendous pressure to, in my lifetime, see the lot improve for my family, for my father, for my mom, and for my siblings, and all those that consider me to be important to them. And so I was very clear, even though we're in the middle of a fight against apartheid, which had heightened at the time that I went to university. But I said, in 4 years' time, I must be out of here. Indeed, in 4 years' time, I was out of there. I was working. Notwithstanding, I still was a member of political structures at varsity. I was involved in the formation of SANSCO. I was involved in the formation of SATISCO, which was a Students' Sports Congress. I was involved in the social life at university. I've always valued balance. I've always, even in terms of how I raise my own children, said you must have balance. When you come out of a certain phase, it's because you've done your best in the phase. Don't be a young adult, an old man who still wants to be a teenager when he's an old man. Because you have skipped a generation in your upbringing. So those are some of the philosophies that may be irrelevant in terms of today's discussion, but certainly I went to university to learn and to be a holistically balanced person. And then, of course, after 6 years working, I discovered engineering was not my first love. It certainly was not. If I felt a tinge of cold or some soreness in my throat, I'll book myself sick leave, But since I became an entrepreneur, I will limp to the office. I will crawl out of my bed to do work. Why? Because the bug has bitten me. I enjoy what I'm doing. And for me, 6 years was a very long time. Thank God I've never drank in my life, but I could have easily become a drunkard if I had had an affinity towards alcohol, because it would have been a nice escape for me. I was frustrated working in an environment which I did not enjoy, doing things that I had mastered in terms of academic content, but I had no drive. So I had to face the reality, go and study further. Did an MBA at UCT on a full-time basis. I came back, I departed from engineering. I went into the world of finance, working as a corporate advisor to the National Empowerment Consortium when they were acquiring Jonic. I helped the trade union, Saru Investments, to be established. I ran that for about 4 years. I went to study further at Harvard, a 4-month program called Program for Global Leadership. I came back, I started my company in earnest in 2002, Zungu Investments Company. On a shoestring budget, I had no asset base to talk about, but I had the know-how, I had the relationships, I had been there, done that. I thought I could now do it for myself. And indeed, I started the Zungu Investments Company, which is a company that I run up to now. So that's basically a brief background about myself.
Thank you for that, Mr. Zungu. I think I'm hoping what it's doing for our participants tonight is it's illustrating that the road to success is never linear. There are some, changes that you have to make along the way. I think a lot of us grow up with this idea that you must be a doctor or a lawyer or what have you. But what happens when you are in that job that you've revered for so long, and you are in it and you don't love it? How do you, pivot to something different? And I think a lot of the times people don't get to hear that perspective from people that we hold in high regard. So thank you for that. And just on that, I remember reading somewhere that based on where you were growing up at the time in Umlazi, what you wanted to be was to be a teacher. But, you know, Shell then awarded you this bursary, and that changed your perspective about what the possibilities are. And you also mentioned something along the lines of when corporate South Africa acts in a responsible manner for the benefits of society, society changes. And that really stuck with me because I'd like to understand from your point of view, you know, using the Shell example, using that quote that stuck with me, is how, from your point of view, what role can businesses play in equalizing the social economy? And where would you say that we need to start with this?
Well, thank you. Let me just go back a bit. You know, if you look at Black people who succeeded in the 70s and 80s, there's one thing common among them. They were academically gifted. They excelled at what they were doing at school. And the break they got was through academic scholarships, either to go and study overseas, you know, or at local universities, and to use that as a pathway out of poverty, for lack of a better word. You know, I knew that unless I made an impression as an academically oriented person, that then I had to rely on my parents' affordability limits. And my parents had told me quite frankly that, look, your older brother is at university, and we're educating him because he doesn't have a scholarship or a bursary. And whatever help we're getting is not enough. So my boy, you know, I won't be able to send you to university. They told me that quite frankly. And I was quite comfortable with that. I knew they were trying, and I felt for them. I said, Dad, I'm gonna go to college. I'm gonna get a teaching diploma. And I've always felt that teaching is or education is one massive instrument that you can use to shepherd your people out of you know, ignorance, out of poverty, out of hunger and everything ill. So the choice of teaching was well considered. It was not the only option, but I felt, no, that's what I can do. And I'd actually been accepted at Amanzi College of Education to do teaching. I remember because during the science week, when I was in the top 10, went to industry, and one of the top educators at Dodi College was taking us around, and he wanted to know what I was going to do. And I said I wanted to do teaching. And there and then he organized forms for me, said they would be very glad to have me at Dodi the following year. So that was around June. In July, when we came back from winter holidays, I was offered an opportunity to pitch for an Anglo-American, what is called the cadet scheme. And I did very well, but I was going to be 17 years in my first year at varsity. And in terms of the Anglo-American cadet scheme, you had to be at least 18 years in your first year at varsity, so that you could spend a few months or a few hours or days underground in the mine. And I wouldn't be able to do that because of my age. And so regrettably, that offer was withdrawn. And my school principal said, no, don't worry, you'll get a chance to pitch for Shell scholarship. And of course, I got that. And the rest is history. Now, for me, that saved me from going down the path of being a teacher. We can only hypothesize about what could have happened, but I did not become a teacher. I still respect the profession. I just wish that people who are teachers could take themselves a lot more seriously than we think collectively they do. And the role that they can play to really catapult our country to where it belongs in the world of nations is sometimes not taken seriously by them, but that for another day. The important thing about corporates is that when they decide to go down a certain path and they apply themselves and are single-minded in executing that thought, things do happen. If I look at people that were Shell scholars who have gone on to achieve great things, who have gone on to make a contribution to society, I truly appreciate the role that Shell played in challenging apartheid and in challenging its construct and giving Black people a chance to be what Verwoerd truly believed were incapable of becoming. And it is those small things that over time added together served to undermine apartheid. Was Verwoerd, de Klerk, and all those other ministers of education would have preferred us not going to University of Cape Town or Rhodes University of Wits, that we needed to confine ourselves to Fort Hare, Ungoye, Tefluop, and on and so on. But we got there, and as soon as we got there, we're at the forefront of challenging apartheid. We're joined with liberal forces at those universities. We're still challenged by the conservative elements, but if you saw those universities which were multiracial in character, they were at the forefront of a fight against apartheid. In part, it was the corporates who enabled that, even if it was not their intention, but it became an unintended consequence of their call it a positive action. I think the same could hold today. When corporates act in a single-minded fashion to challenge the political structures, even of today, even if they will prefer to be not challenged, they will change. And I've seen it with my own naked eyes. And I've been at the forefront, at the center of it when the government's approach towards COVID-19 response called for business to take a much more hard approach in challenging government and in exposing the short-sighted manner in which they were responding to the challenge. And it had positive effects. So if I use just those two examples as a microcosm of how corporate South Africa, when they're responsible, of how business in general, when responsible and acting in a single-minded fashion, in a genuine and authentic manner, not because they're just protecting their interests, but they're acting in what they consider to be the best interests of society that they serve, a lot of things can change. But when we become, quiet, when we become complicit in not expressing how society believes and acts or thinks, then the politicians who are our counterparts in terms of social partnership then rule the roost, and often than not, regrettably, they misdirect society, and we end up really collapsing into the doldrums, or we end up in the cusp of negativity. sadly, that's where we find ourselves as South African society today. So something ought to be done to get ourselves back on a winning path.
Agreed, which then kind of leads me into a conversation just speaking about intention and being intentional about the behaviors of corporates. Is the conversation that's been going on for a while, but I think it has been heightened over the last few years, is the pay disparity between men and women, and in this country, I would say between races as well. Is how do corporates address those things? How do they become more intentional about rewarding a Karen the same way that they would reward a Mandisa? And, you know, putting women in positions that they should be in based on their qualifications and their capabilities. How do corporates become more intentional about ensuring that's more equal?
Maybe let's start by affirming your posit. I think there's sufficient evidence to say you are correct in your departure argument that there's lack of parity in terms of pay and reward structures in corporate South Africa, and that discrepancy is deliberate, and it has a racial character, and it also has a gender character, where Black people are on the receiving end of such misbehavior, and where women, and in particular Black women, find themselves on the receiving end. So when you talk about a triple oppression of African women, therein it starts to manifest itself. It's an ill that needs to be challenged because it's fundamentally wrong. Why must my mother, who works hard and who makes sacrifices and leave for work, risk being abused by a man next door, sexually abused or harassed, and on top of that, be not compensated appropriately for all her efforts. If one makes that as a personalized example, then it achieves the kind of emotional response that it ought to have. Because it's a very personal experience by our mothers, by our sisters, who leave home to give it their best shot, only to be subjected to all sorts of misogynistic practices. It's wrong. It's ethically wrong. It's morally wrong. It's repugnant. It's indefensible. So purely on those bases, it needs to be challenged, and women must not be the only ones at the forefront of this. Men must be. Men must not ask for permission, because unfortunately there's another very perverted approach that says step back. It's our challenge. Only us must be at the forefront. It's a school of thought that I think, in my opinion, is misguided. There are many men who feel very, very strongly about the injustice, who want to be at the forefront. They must be allowed to be at the forefront. And when they step in the forefront, they must do so not with a view to then control and direct this agenda, which is a gender agenda. They must go there with all humility to make their contribution. But it's something that must therefore be deliberate. It has to be about policies. It has to be about the carrot and the stick. All these so-called, let me not say so-called, all these commissions, whether it's for gender equality, commissions for employment equity, must show their teeth. So far, so bad in that they threaten to take companies to court, but I've not heard of a single company which has been fined anything for lying about their own employment equity, realities, let alone for having policies which are, contrary to what our constitutional dictate is all about. So a good example has to be made. So it's got to be a combination of carrot and the stick, persuasion and pressure, mass action and boardroom kind of civil discussions, because it is a site of struggle. It's not an option that we choose to pursue. It's fundamental. Even people like Madiba once asserted that it's only when women folk feel liberated and are in earnest liberated that we shall have achieved our true freedom. At the moment, we are far from that. So those who have the privilege of serving in corporate structures like boards, committees of the board, employment equity committees at an executive level, must agitate, must play their part, and those who have a privilege of serving South African people in legislative structures, whether they be provincial or national, must have their voices heard, so that this plight of Black people, the plight of women, must be addressed and attended to once and for all.
Thank you. I was just thinking while you were speaking about how I would say as a country, in terms of representation in parliament, representation in the Gauteng legislature, where there's, a greater representation of women in those kinds of structures. And I'm thinking now with Joe Biden slowly selecting his, what do you call it in American terms? His support team, I guess, for the purposes of moving on, where it's more diverse. So there's more Black people. So there's diversity in terms of color, there's diversity in terms of gender and that kind of representation. Do you think that those kinds of changes, when they start being implemented at those levels, it pushes corporates to start making those changes? Which then leads me to my next question, where as the Black Management Forum, we represent Black professionals as well as Black people in business. How do we lead by example by assisting in closing the gaps that we're seeing in society? So, both in terms of gender representation, both as well as the pay gap that we've just discussed, but most importantly, how do we work towards closing the poverty gap that most affects the Black community in this country?
You see, political structures sometimes are like boards of companies. It's very easy to achieve parity, achieve representation at a board level. And sometimes you even have a board of a company being majority Black, but when you look at executive structures, it's the other way around. It's the same as when you are supporting, putting together your support team in government. It's very easy to say, I'm going to have 50% women, I'm going to have 50% men, or I'm going to have majority women. But sometimes there's almost like sheer recognition that where work gets done, where call it meritocracy needs to be seen, is at an operational level. At a level of creating your own executive, people tend to be guided by other principles. And let's just be very frank about it. That's why sometimes even yourself, when you're an entrepreneur and you say, geez, man, I would love to have a Black person as CFO, but geez, the quality of audits, things that they overlook, even on the tax structuring of deals. And you say, you know what, I'm suffering deeply because of my stubborn affirming of people who are just letting me down because they don't rise to the level of competence that I expect of them. So sometimes you end up saying, look, I will employ this person, but I'm going to end up having a massive support structure, or most of the work will be done by consultants. And this person will then be supervising consultants. So all you're doing is you're expanding your operations of the capability. And where real work gets done is then outside of the organization. I think we need to observe that, because that's what happens, especially with even with the call it state attorney, where they say we're losing some cases, and we're now gonna employ outside. They're gonna give briefs to outside firms because within the system we are short of a capability. I know I'm digressing a bit, but all I'm saying is an example that you cited of how Joe Biden is assembling his support team may not be a true reflection of what happens even in corporate America. How you achieve gender parity at the legislature in Gauteng does not talk to how corporates in Gauteng are represented at executive level. It's chalk and cheese. What we need to do is to ensure that once we are driving this parity, let's be equally hard and demanding of our people to not drop the ball. It's better if we talk to our people ourselves, even if we do so behind closed doors, that we will not tolerate incompetence. If that incompetence, even if that competence is associated with our people. In fact, our people will be even harder on them because we are expecting, higher standards from them. That said, it's not an excuse at all. We need to develop our people. We need to give our people a chance. We need to support them. We need to allow them to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes and not begrudge them when they make mistakes. As long as they commit, they shall not repeat those mistakes. And because that's the only way forward. No nation has just developed because it was destined to be a success. They all make mistakes, and no people will ascend to the apex of their capabilities without having teething problems, without crawling and falling as they stumble and as they dust up their backside to move up. So we have to be tolerant and we have to be patient with our people, but we shall not, condone incompetence by our people, because it's really those examples that tend to undermine us. And it happens, unfortunately, in SOEs, where people are given massive tasks and they just do all the wrong things that they're not supposed to do. And they expect us to come out and defend them.
I hear you. So the question I really love asking our guests is around economic participation of every South African at every level, right? So leveling the playing field there. So I always make the example of a child that comes from, let's say, Alex, because that's what's closest to me, who is a Sandile Zungu, who is academically gifted. They're now exposed to the world that's out there. So they know that they can become anything really because they've got access to Facebook and what have you. And they are sitting at home with maybe not the benefits of having a bursary or knowing where to attain one. How do we open up the world of those people so that they participate in our economy beyond just, mama's bazaar shop around the corner, beyond, Du's shoe shine or car wash or what have you? How do we motivate and get those people to start participating in our economy? Because I do believe that there's, there's space for corporates, but there's also space for what we'd call the township economy. How do we motivate those people to start going? And what are some of the tools that you believe they require in order for them to start going?
That's a very important question. Organizations like the Black Management Forum, organizations like the Black Business Council, are activist organizations. People like yourself who have chosen that you just don't want to enjoy the fruits and the proceeds of your own education. You trouble and worry yourself about the plight of others. That's a calling, and which you need to take seriously, and which you need to focus ourselves on delivering. And therefore, we have to continue to worry ourselves about the deepening inequality in our society. The levels of poverty that up until COVID-19 and the lockdown, I just couldn't believe that we have such deep levels of poverty in this country. I thought there's no child in South Africa who can, with hand in heart, say, I go to bed on an empty stomach. Because there's such a wide net of relief, social grants, child-headed households, and so on. Yes, of course, the inefficiencies in the system are such that some mothers give birth to children. They collect imali eqolo and then they use that for all sorts of things. I don't want to trivialize that subject matter. And then you end up with children going to bed on an empty stomach. Notwithstanding the causalities of such, we have deep poverty in this country. And we have to concern ourselves as organizations because in the long run, something is going to give. We are a forever shrinking island because these rough seas are engulfing the grounds. Unless we do something, we will be overcome by the grief that surrounds us. And quite frankly, at the rate at which we are going, It's only a matter of time. Can we salvage the situation? Of course we can salvage the situation. How? State power is a very important instrument. That's why everyone wants to talk to government. Even if you're a multi-billion-dollar corporate, you know that on your own, you cannot address all the social ills. So you've got to talk to government to do the right thing. You've got to ensure that people who lead government are the right people, who are properly attuned to the challenges, and who are there to serve South African people, not to serve themselves and their own immediate families. Because it's only when we use state power correctly that the small efforts of BMF, the small efforts of BBC can then be properly leveraged. We cannot do it on our own. We've got government. We must just make sure that this government does what it ought to do. But in our own small worlds, we've got to come up with programs that talk about taking entrepreneurship to the townships, that talk about mobilizing resources for township entrepreneurs, that talk about lobbying for better bylaws such that township entrepreneurs can thrive, that lobby for the right approach towards certain sectors in our economy being overcome and being ultimately led by non-South Africans, whether those non-South Africans are Pakistanis or Ethiopians or Somalis or Bulgarians, it doesn't matter. It was in the face of deep inequality, in the face of high unemployment, people really see a person who does not belong as taking opportunities away from them. So if we are to challenge xenophobia fundamentally and legitimately, we have to unleash opportunities and make sure that our people participate in those opportunities and benefit from them. And that's the role of individuals like you and I, Mandisa. It's the role of organizations like the BMF, the BBC of this world. And it's the role of a changing society to continue to agitate and not to trust and to be complacent of the politicians and their ability to do the right thing. At the moment, they're just not doing the right thing.
So I suppose that then answers Mletisi's question, who was asking, what do you think your role, what do you think the role is of organizations such as the BMF and the BBC in shaping our economy and advancing economic justice? And my take from that is that we need to be the advocates that we want to see in order to see the change start happening, and using the various platforms that we have in order to do that and to draw attention. So just a word to the participants before I lead to my last question, and I feel like I've been hogging Mr. Zungu for the evening. I'd like to open up the floor for you to ask your questions, as Mletisi did. We do have a competition because, as we know, Mr. Zungu recently acquired AmaZulu Football Club. My question pertains to that. So the best question gets to win a personalized AmaZulu Football Club jersey. So yeah, with that, Mr. Zungu, your acquisition of AmaZulu is a very different undertaking to all your other business acquisitions. We're quite interested to know and understand what prompted your venture into football, and what your vision is for that club going into the future.
No, thank you for that question, Mandisa. I grew up loving soccer, like most people especially from my province of KwaZulu-Natal. If you do a survey of people and their favorite sport, it is found that 28% of people who choose soccer as their first sport of choice are in KwaZulu-Natal. Yet the population of KwaZulu-Natal, makes up less than, I think about 22% of the South African population. So KwaZulu-Natal is quite overrepresented in passion for soccer. It is no wonder that I grew up in a household which supported AmaZulu. My father, my mother, my uncles, it was just my generation which began to support Pirates and Kaizer Chiefs. I grew up supporting Pirates. Why? Because those were teams which were fashionable to support. They were Jomo Sono, they were winning trophies, and Kaizer Chiefs similarly. But the residual support for Sotho has always been there. That even though I supported Orlando Pirates, but I always had my secondary team of support, which is AmaZulu Football Club. I will argue that that situation pertains even now, that if you're from that province, you may support Mamelodi Sundowns because it is the team of the moment, it's been winning trophies, and everyone wants to associate with the winning team. But at the back of your mind, or in your heart, you've got a very soft spot for AmaZulu Football Club. So my argument is that come the year of our centenary, which is in 2032, we are currently the oldest team in the country. AmaZulu was formed in 1932. Orlando Pirates was formed 5 years later and was actually formed by one of the strongest supporters of AmaZulu, which was Usofasonke Mpanza, a guy from Georgetown in KwaZulu-Natal, who came up to Johannesburg, established Orlando as a town, and established Orlando Pirates as a club. So Kaizer Chiefs was formed almost 40 years later. Moroka Swallows was formed 15 years after AmaZulu. So we're an old team. At the year of our centenary, I want AmaZulu to be the biggest team in the country. It's a sport of the people. And so I'm investing in it with the view that that support will be a commercial success. But to build it, one has got to win trophies. One has got to play the quality of soccer that will have entertainment value, even for those who don't support the team. If in the afternoon you are watching soccer and there's a game of AmaZulu, you know that it's going to be watching goals being banged, going to be watching quality defense, quality attack, and so on. So that's how you build a brand. I think at the moment we've been signing on players who have got pedigree to win trophies. We've been there, done that. Yes, they are elderly gentlemen, but they've got 2-3 years to offer us as a team, whilst we are building young players, great young players within the team. So it's a very exciting undertaking, and I'm not accustomed to be on the losing side, and to not accomplishing my my dreams. So I'm quite confident that our path to greatness has commenced, and join the green train and be an AmaZulu supporter. So the jersey will give, hopefully will not be hung on the wall or given to your worker. If you do, wonderful. We will welcome that, but we hope it can win you over as a future supporter of AmaZulu Football Club.
Awesome. So being from KZN, I personally have an affinity to AmaZulu. I remember my grandfather and his friends every other Sunday getting into, one of the friends owned a taxi. They would all go to church first service and then drive to Durban to go watch soccer. And we knew that if AmaZulu won, the bells was coming out. If they didn't, it was balls. So, so I have very fond memories of AmaZulu, and I certainly wish you all the best in turning that institution around. So over to Benjamin's question. Thank you for that, Benjamin. So he's asking, do you believe that organizations such as the BMF are still relevant? And the reason is asking this is that it's been so many years down the road, I'm guessing since the formation of the BMF, but we seemingly as Black professionals are still facing the similar challenges. And he wishes, he says, great vision for AmaZulu. He likes the notion of making it financially viable, and that's what we need in South Africa.
My response is very simple. We need the Black Management Forum. I think, like all versatile and learning organizations, your own environment has got justification for changing tactics, has got justification for doing things differently, and the new campaigns to lead. But the need for a fighting organization in corporate South Africa, fighting for Black people to have opportunities, that cannot be overemphasized. And the biggest mistake we can ever make is assuming that now that we've got political freedom, that people we have sent to go and fight for us in Parliament to spearhead legislative changes. One, that they mean to do that. They're not motivated by other considerations, or that they have a capability to do it. Africa, our continent, is awash with terrible examples of societies that lowered their guards and basically left it to the politicians. By the time they woke up, the democratic space was closed, and there were food for whips and tear gas and pressured hoses from tanks and live ammunition. We cannot stop fighting. In any case, there's plenty evidence that we've not achieved much. We need to just double and triple our efforts, more than we are doing right now. I think I'll be the first one to be critical of the efficacy of our own organizations. But the fact that we realize that something ought to be done is a good thing, because we're not satisfied that, no, it's now time for us to take leave. We've done the best that we can. We have not done the best that we could.
Thank you. Benjamin, I hope that answers your question. Papama sent us a rather long question. I will try to summarize it as best I can. I'll just start here. There's stronger trust placed on private firm experience as breeding ground for professionals, and not so much of an equal status placed on having worked in government. With a 2.8 million job loss in 6 months and private sector shrinking, where will the new breeding grounds be, and what is the kind of institutional experience that will enable us to trust future leaders, and what kind of work is BBC doing to close this gap?
So I think the question was a bit long. Just summarize it for me, if you don't mind.
So I think in summary, sorry, you may continue.
Okay, because I'm looking at the charts here. If you don't mind, let me just see if I can. Is that's one from Benjamin?
It's
No.
from Papama.
From Papama.
Yes, on the chat.
Or Papama Mngandi.
Yes.
Is that the one that says the future of work is a major consideration post-COVID? Pre-COVID, there was always a sense that we need to be led by professionals who have paid their school fees. This has often meant that one will have been employed in corporate prior to being trusted to lead in our institutions. There's a stronger trust placed on private firm experience as breeding ground and look, anyway, if you don't mind with that, I'm getting the gist of what Papama is putting forward.
Yeah.
With COVID, we're in a new world. Like things have been turned upside down. The future of work, as it correctly defines it, will need to be re-examined. If I remember well, last year, the International Labour Organization, in its annual meeting, the theme was about the future of work, but that future of work was pre-COVID. The future of work will not only be influenced now by where work will be executed, especially given that working from home has now become very fashionable, but also what sort of trades, what sort of careers will emerge will now have to be re-examined, whether the future of work as posited last year is still relevant. And therefore, what sort of background, experience, knowledge must you have to be relevant in a post-COVID future of work environment? I think the answer, the guess is as good as mine. Papama's guess is as good as mine in terms of articulating what type of environment are we going to land with. But what is more important is that Africa must not be left behind. New concepts tend to be defined elsewhere, and we are just the takers. Almost like we readily accept that we've got nothing to offer, we've got nothing to contribute. We must just take what emerges from Europe or America. Whereas we can have a role to play. The reason why I say so is because we've got peculiar challenges in South Africa that we have to make sure that as the new work is being redefined, we must not become irrelevant. If the new kind of work will be centered on fourth industrial revolution, will be centered on connectivity and data access, and we are where we are, it is evident that we'll be left behind yet again. That's why we've been agitating as a BBC, maybe addressing that question, what role will organizations like BBC play? That's why we've been gung-ho in agitating for the allocation of the spectrum in a manner that does not only benefit the majors like Vodacom, MTN, but also ensures that those who are new entrants can also have access to the spectrum, and ensure that the township entrepreneurs, the rural entrepreneurs, people who are involved in agricultural value chains, where the bulk of employment really is, people who are involved in tourism, can have a fighting chance in an environment awash with spectrum availability. So the future of work is something that needs to be debated at length, but we must play a role as Africans in general. We must play a role as South Africans in rural and township geographies going forward. We must refuse to be left behind. But it is organizations like the BMF and the BBC who must really sit down and have their own workshop instead of fighting the mundane, the usual. Why has someone been overlooked for a job? Let's take our sophistication to a much higher level where we can serve society better and serve our economy better than we've done before. And such a scope exists even in this broader category that Papama has so eloquently presented as a thesis of challenge.
Thank you. And that's going to lead me to the last question from Benjamin, which is around the coaching of Black leaders to ensure the success of our SOEs. And he's asking, what are we doing or getting wrong in those institutions?
Look, SOEs are a unique challenge in South Africa. For me, it will fill me with a lot of tears because Afrikaners set up these SOEs to resolve the Afrikaner unemployment problem. And you saw Afrikaners working for South African Railways, said Afrikaans as Spoorweë. They established the SAAs of this world, said Afrikaans, Lugdiens, Telkom, Armscor, some of it to fulfill a specific need in defense of apartheid, but also doubled with that to not leave Afrikaners behind. And those SOEs were working. They were excluding our people, yes, but they were working. And they were serving the narrow interests of few white people, yes, but they were working. And we could have scaled them up and made sure that our people move in and work for the benefit of a larger population, but work nevertheless. What we have allowed is politicians to view parastatals as some kind of piggy banks for plundering. We have certainly allowed even our own organizations to see parastatals as some kind of sources of funding for their campaigns and inefficient structures, to the detriment of those people who mean to serve with honor, with integrity, who then get frustrated if they are standing in the way of nefarious agendas. And I know of a lot of people who would have gone to serve in parastatals, on the boards of those parastatals, in top executive structures, who will have exited those parastatals in tears with their careers and integrity and reputations in tatters. And they will ask themselves, was it worth it? No, it was not worth it. It was thankless. So there are a few outliers of people who have come out of those parastatals looking stronger than before. But the bulk of them will have gone in there, exited, drowning in their tears. And so it's not a question of mentorship and coaching only. It's about the governance. Before you coach anybody in a job, is he in the right space where such coaching will yield the results? We've allowed parastatals to become the home affairs of old, where nothing was working and people were content that, things don't work. I'm going to get an ID. See you at dusk. Because you'll be there waiting in the queues. Just on your face, an official just pulls down the shutters and goes and have tea for 20 minutes, and you see them laughing in that open plan office without any explanation. So that's what parastatals have become. They're not serving society. And so when we are saying we need to mentor, yes, of course we need to mentor. That's the role of BMF, to ensure that there are support structures for those people. But unless we resolve the governance structures, there will be no parastatals to talk of anyway. The roads will be potholed even on the national highways because there will be no sunrun. They will be leaking waters in metros because the Johannesburg water will be gutted to the core. And even those parastatals which are national in nature, in the network economies, will be non-existent. So we've got a fundamental challenge, which is about the sustainability of parastatals. But for those who are in the BMFs, must do their part to ensure that the young people who are starting their careers there, they are coached, reach out to them. Those who are stalwarts within BMF who are now retired must come together and say, BMF would like to pitch for this idea. It's better if we do it using the BMF banner. It's better if we do it using the BBC banner. Please support us and champion this, because we've got youth, we've got plenty experience that we'd like to share with young people. And whilst we are resolving bigger challenges, all we just want to do is to coach and mentor these young people to become better corporate citizens. And I think there's scope for both to be coexisting as challenges to be confronted.
Thank you. And in closing, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And thank you to our participants tonight. Based on the questions that we received today, is there one in particular that stood out for you that will walk away with the AmaZulu t-shirt?
To be honest, I liked all the three questions, but if I was to choose one that really challenged me to think and to exercise my mental gymnastics was Papama's. I don't know what Papama's favorite number is, so we can have AmaZulu t-shirt or jersey written Papama. Papama what, number 7? So I think he can revert to you, Mandisa, and then you'll formally communicate with me. But I enjoyed all the questions otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just from my side, I think there've been so many takeouts from this conversation that we've had tonight. But the biggest one for me is, and also referencing Papama's question as to what to next now after COVID, it's that we shouldn't approach anything from a place of disadvantage, because I think that if you're coming from a place of empowerment, if you're coming from a place of, having a specific vision, whether how overwhelming it is, you can overcome in the same way that you, have inspired us to overcome whatever challenges that you may have faced, along the way, and became the success that you are. And yeah, so thank you again for your time. So I'll hand over to Nkosinathi, who will do the closing for us tonight.
Cool. Yeah, Mr. Zungu, it was a lovely session. As I think we spoke yesterday, I look forward to the session. The guests were not as engaging as we would have liked, but I really did also take a liking to Papama's question. And just so you know, he said he's jersey number 11, not 7. So he's up front. on the flank, on the wing.
He's the left winger.
No, maybe it's the wing you need to win the CAF, not even the league. Maybe. So, Mr. Zungu, thank you very much for attending. I know it was a short time frame, but you did honor the invite, and we really do appreciate your humility and allowing us to question you and take and go on the journey with us. I mean, we had a lot of learnings from your session, especially for me. Primarily, it's that we, as Black managers, we need to showcase excellence, but we also need to persevere. That's what I've learned from you. Coming from Umlazi, I remember I read something about you saying, I think you called yourself Umfana Wasemlazi. Yes. So I was like, no, I like that, because you're authentic and true to yourself. And, it shows that you came from nothing into something. So you're an inspiration for all of us. I know there might be guests who are stuck in corporate. We've been sitting in one position in a cubicle for all these years, not knowing if you're going to go up or down. But, your stories really does inspire us. It inspires us to do great. It doesn't matter where you come from. You only went to Hilton post-matric and had a glimpse of it, but you still probably did a lot better than some of the peers who had advantages at the time, driven by the hardships that you had. So you're inspiring us to take the hardships, use them as a drive, and push forward and push through. So we thank you very much for that, Mr. Zungu. And I think I'd also like to hand over to the chair for her to also bid her last farewell. And I'd like to encourage our members. Essentially, I'm that guy who, if you go to church, there's the guy who comes before the preacher, who asks you for money. I'm that guy. I'm that guy just before altar call. So I'd like all the members to essentially ensure that they are in good standing. As the year ends, and please ensure that you're in good standing, and please look forward to more engaging, progressive, and educational sessions that we'll have. And thank you once again, Mr. Zungu. Let me hand over to my leader, who'll do the final goodbye.
Nkosinathi always does this to me. The agreement was that he'll do the closing. I think I should not have come on video. But thank you so much, Mr. Zungu. I think when Nkosinathi tabled your name as a leader to come through, I honestly thought, this man is busy. Let's try, but he's busy. And I think I asked him a couple of times, and he's like, no, his office came back and said yes. I was like, really? Oh wow. So we really, really appreciate the time that you've taken to come and share. I mean, I know you as a businessman. I didn't know that you studied engineering and you went into finance. So as you were talking, I was like, okay, so there are a lot of more of us, who've studied engineering, mainly because you had a bursary, not necessarily that it was your first love. And I think lessons from this, that sometimes it's important. You don't have to start where you want to end. But it's important to then, take those chances, take that job that you think is really not what you want, but it'll be an important base. It'll be your point of pivot, your point from which you jump from. So really, really exciting. And I mean, it's really exciting when they told me that you bought a football club, and yeah, it's really exciting. This, for me, I think you epitomize a leader that truly wants to make a difference in every sphere of life, and just take opportunities and just expand opportunities, because we all know that for Black children, certainly soccer is a way out as well. And as much as we know, some of us only know of the big clubs, we know that some of the small clubs are where people also start, people that you would have never thought, who would have never thought that there is an out there for them. And I certainly hope that, I know that with your club, we're not gonna have players that were in your club that we have to collega for when they pass on, because you certainly going to impart philosophies around investment and just taking care of your future. We really, really thank you for honoring us. Thank you and good evening.
Well, once again, in closing from my side, I wish BMF well and the Gauteng chapter success in your endeavors. And I wish you individually and your families the merriest of Christmases and a happy new year. The struggle continues. We just have to double and triple our efforts. Challenges are plenty. Thank you very much for inviting me once again.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.